Hello everybody and welcome to Geopolitical Trends. My name is David Oualaalou. So good to be with you as always. Why aren't we hearing about what's going on in New Zealand? You know, Western media is kind of like doing a blackout on the demonstrations that's going on. In this video, I am going to provide you insight into what's going on in Wellington, in New Zealand, actually across the board in New Zealand, and why we are not hearing about it. But before I delve deeper into this, remember to subscribe and smash that notification button so you will be notified every time I upload a new video. And as always, thank you for your support. So here's what's going on in New Zealand. New Zealand farmers are going to hit the streets over some taxes the government wants to impose on them. Well, they already took the street last week and they're going again, you know, with their tractors this time to protest the government plans to tax, get this guys, cow burps. And other, it's not a laughing matter because farmers, that's their livelihood. So, and the government is saying because, well, some other greenhouse gases, the emission and all that, we have to tax you for it. So, and who's, by the way, there is a lobby group, it's called Groundswell, the ones that in New Zealand, that's the one that organized those protests. And I will provide you a link to all this, you know. There were about 50 protests in the different towns. Yeah, some of them were smaller, because New Zealand doesn't have a lot of people to begin with. So, but here's the thing. Last week, the government proposed a new farm levy as part of a plan, so-called to tackle climate change. What the heck? You know, their Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, she's like clueless. So the government said that it would be the first, New Zealand that is, it will be the first in the world, and that farmers should be able to recoup the cost by charging more for climate-friendly products. This is absurd. If you hear any nonsense from governments, New Zealand now is displaying that, you know, because here's the thing, what you need to know, you know, farming is very, very big in New Zealand. There are about 10 million beef and dairy cattle, okay? And there are about 26 million sheep compared to just 5 million people. You get the idea. So, and about half of all the greenhouse gas emission comes from farms. Methane also from burping cattle, which makes according to the government, it makes a big contribution to the in impacting climate change, which is nonsense. But here's the thing. Some farmers in New Zealand have argued that the proposed tax will increase global greenhouse gas emission. Why? Because by shifting farming to countries that are less efficient at making food. They got a point. You know, I agree with them. I'm not a farmer, but it's common sense. You know, this is what becomes now problematic in Western governments, that you start to realize, what are they losing common sense? You know, is this pre-planned? You know, because now it defies logic. You know, I'm looking at some head of states in Western world that they are acting against their people. Since when? No. So at the protest, one protest that just took place in Wellington, Farmer Dave McCurdy, and I will provide you a link to what he stated. So he said, and I quote, let me get the quote here. Most farmers were working hard on their farms during a spell of good spring weather at a particularly busy time of the year. He added also, it's our life, our families' lives. We are out there to wreck it. We wouldn't make any money. We love our farms. That's what annoys us. We are painted at these bad guys, but a lot of farmers have spent generations looking after that land. End of quote. That's a heartbreaking statement. If this cannot sort of make you wonder why the New Zealand government acting like a fascist, I'm not saying it straightforward, because this is what's coming from so-called democracies. Come on, what happens to the Western world? But I'm coming up with one answer, and the answer is maybe it's on its last leg of its hegemony. That's the way I see it. The farmer Dave continues, and he said the proposed tax didn't take proper account of all, get this, the trees and the brush that he and other farmers had planted, which help, basically, you all know what the trees do, right? They trap carbon and offset emissions. So the New Zealand government is not even taking that into consideration. And he added that if the proposed tax and herd reduction went ahead, it will be ruinous for many, many New Zealand farmers. So shame on the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern for really embarking on a policy that is harming the livelihood of farmers, no more, no less. Because here's the thing, farming, just for you FYI to know, because this is what I found it unusual, why the Western media is not talking about this at all. So farming remains vital to New Zealand economy. The dairy products, for example, including those used to make infant formula in China, guess what? Are New Zealand's largest export earner. So farmers, and let's be fair to the farmers there in New Zealand, farmers single-handedly in New Zealand, single-handedly kept the economy afloat during the pandemic or the lockdowns, whatever that was, And now that the threat has passed, a recession is looming. So the government was coming after them, after the farmers. Once again, shame on that government, or Jacinda Ardern government. So New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has pledged the nation will become carbon neutral by 2050. And part of that plan, according to Jacinda, it includes reducing methane emission from farm animals by 10% by 2030 and by 47% by 2050. And I will provide you a link to all this. We all know this is nothing but hypes. Look at just how, for example, and I'm not picking on anybody, I look at, what's his name? Prince of England, Harry, was talking about climate change, and yet he's flying on a private jets from one continent to the next. Not just him, but there are others, the billionaires, and, it's kind of saying one thing and doing another thing. That's what we call in English hypocrisy. That's what it is. So the government now has worked with farmers and other groups to try to come up with emission plan they could all live with. But many farmers have been incensed because they don't trust Jacinda Ardern's government. Like I always say, do you trust government? No, you won't. But here's the thing you need to think about. What does New Zealand have in common with the Netherlands or Dutch? No. Well, it's because Dutch farmers also are promising fresh protests after the government backs a plan, guess what? To forcibly seize farmlands. You're looking at a government now taking over your property. What happened to democracy? What happened to the right to property? It's concerning. Dutch farmers' organizations have vowed to launch more protests in the Netherlands in response to advice from the government's mediator, who has called for the foreseeable relocation of farming firms and the seizure of up to 600 farms deemed to be the heaviest nitrogen emitters. I've been in Holland so many times. There are farms all over the place. They know how to take care of their lands. But what the government in the Dutch is doing now, it's like, another fascism. That's what it looks like, And even the Farmers Defense Force leader, his name is Mark, let me get his name here, Mark van den Ower, announced this week that Dutch farmers will come again, take to the street, and rightly so, after the government expressed its intention to adopt the plan presented by former Deputy Prime Minister Jan Remix to meet the nitrogen standard demanded by the European Union. Makes you just wonder, are the Dutch government bowing to the demand of the EU at the expense of the Dutch citizens, or farmers for that matter? So that becomes the logical question is, then why become a member of the EU? And this is why I talked last time about the collapse of the EU is coming. This is why I said last time, Hungary is considering now getting out of the EU altogether. Some Eastern European countries are thinking about it. Italy now is embarking on policies that go against the EU. Why? Because Meloni, the new prime minister in Italy, is looking after the welfare of Italians first. And rightly so. This is what you will expect from a head of a government. So here's the thing, also the same case in Netherlands as it is in New Zealand. In Netherlands, or the Dutch cannot do without farmers. And guess who said this? That's the Dutch king, declared in a meeting with farmers. He had a meeting with the farmers. And he stated, and I quote here, Netherlands cannot do without farmers. End of quote. By the king, of a Dutch. What I found very troubling in the case of Netherlands is that the Dutch Minister of Finance, her name is Sigrid Kaag, is pushing for the introduction now of a central bank digital currency, CBDC, in the Netherlands, and the passing of a law, get this guys, requiring banks to monitor all transactions above 100 euros. Yeah, it's shocking. That means now they're going to be tracking the transactions of the Dutch if they spend more than 100 euros. You can't just see where this is going. And I will provide you a link to this. So the European Central Bank, and by the way, this didn't happen randomly or in a vacuum. This happened in Netherlands in coordination with the Central European Bank. Because the Central European Bank is also pushing for a digital euro. But critics have already warned that CBDC can be used to track and monitor citizens, potentially violating their civil rights or civil liberties. Shame on those governments that they claim to be a democracy and yet at the same time violating the civil liberties of citizens. This is what I'm always like to wonder, what's going on with the Western world? Because all this, it's not happening coincidentally or randomly. But I want to leave you with one note here. Not a conclusion, but one note for you to think. And the note is this. When you consider the finance minister of Dutch, she is a graduate of the World Economic Forum, along with the Prime Minister of Canada, known as Dictator Trudeau, along with the French President Emmanuel Macron, along with Jacinda Ardern, along with the Foreign Minister of Germany, Baerbock, and now the Finance Minister of Dutch, and also the Finnish Foreign Minister Sanna. She is also a graduate of World Economic Forum. This is what's called the Young Leaders. You all see what's going on, right? I don't need to spell it out for you. You're smart enough to read between the lines. And makes you wonder, Are all this happening in a vacuum? Is there really a reason behind it? An agenda of sort? I'll let you reach that conclusion yourself. But here is my question for you for today. Is the government in New Zealand, along with Australia, the Dutch, Canada, have been ordered to act against the welfare of their people? Let me repeat the question. Are the governments of New Zealand, Australia, Dutch, and Canada have been ordered to act against their will or against their people? Make sure to leave me your some comments, and I really would like to read your feedback on this. As always, remember, geopolitics impact your daily life in more ways than one. Till next time, guys. Bye-bye.